Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning into the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing well. This solves some problems.
Let's do it.
Well, we are going to talk about Syria again. There's some activity going on there, and looks like somebody likes war and would like to see it expand on war. And we're just trying to figure out exactly who's on whose side.
Yeah.
But anyway, before we do that, I want to mention something else that's going on in the news. And it's been in the news a whole lot, and we've barely mentioned it because there's so much misinformation on it. And that is, how scared should we really be about coronavirus?
Yeah.
Should we be concerned to 1 degree, a 10th degree? Should we panic? Should we have hysterical reactions? And what's going on? And I'm not claiming that we know all these answers, but I think it's worth talking about, and where I sort of get stopped on trying to seek out the absolute truth. I remember the statement when the Kennedy assassination commission finished. One of it might have been the Supreme Court justice came out and he says, "We will not know about what really did it in our lifetime." Well, I don't think we should wait a lifetime, but I don't think we're getting a straight scoop, and I think that's my biggest concern is that the one number that bothers me is that we know that we can lose 50,000 people in a year from influenza.
Regular old flu.
Yeah, and we know we're down in maybe it's 100 now or so, minuscule in comparison, and yet the leadership is coming out now, even the professionals who know a lot more about this medical thing than I do, but saying the coronavirus is 10 times worse than influenza, and 650,000 people die every year. Wow, how did they get that? And matter of fact, they're adjusting those figures already downward. They said, 2.8%. If you have it, you're going to die, which is a big number. But there's been some adjustments to that downward, and the numbers might have come out of China, and they say, well, why should we believe them? But I think the numbers should be adjusted downward. But my beef on this is if you are claiming that such and such percentage die from coronavirus, well, they've hardly ever been able to test it. Till 2 days ago, there weren't any tests. And we know that people can have it and never know it. People can have a cold and they don't know it's coronavirus. People get over it. And what they do is they take into consideration the sick people that are caught or trapped, like in a nursing home or something, and they take that percentage. But what if you added up everybody who's had it? Influenza, usually people know it, they get a test and they can tell. But in this case, they don't get the test. They don't know what the total number is. So it may be, I can't believe it's 10 times more deadly. The one question, though, is how much is this going to spread? Is it going to get out of control? Or are they not going to follow, some basic rules? But, it gives an opportunity to authoritarian governments to get more power. And China's been blamed for this already, but I would say that we're not immune, our government's not immune for seeking and controlling power for certain reasons. There's profits involved. I mean, who gets to make the vaccine? And I talked about the time swine flu in 1976, that more people died from the vaccine. It was the wrong vaccine, but they rushed it through. It was an absolute emergency, and it was the wrong virus. It's the kind of thing. So there's always profit motives involved. And then there's the political motives.
Yeah.
Let's say Trump comes up with a reasonably good statement. Maybe we don't have all the evidence yet. Hysterical, Trump caused coronavirus. So this is why I'm hesitant to think, hysteria never seems to help things. And there's motivations that sometimes you never know about. There are people who are motivated to see a downfall financially, and this would be a good way to cause chaos. But I think that in time we will learn more, maybe shortly. But the other thing that I want to mention, because there was a great article today on Lou Rockwell's site, and that by Bill Sardi,
Yeah.
that total ignorance about the immune systems. And just think of the people in the nursing home. Everybody knows they're going to have illnesses and all, but they also are in nursing home, in compact, and they take more junk, more drugs than ever. And Bill Sardi is so good on talking about a natural immune, rather than using vaccines, your body does it. And I'm a strong believer in that. I believe that the good health habits, the proper vitamins, proper eating, exercise, even sunlight. He says, vitamin D is good for you. Vitamin C is good for you. So there's so much that could be learned from here. The big problem is, are we going to get the truth from these people who have special interests? So that is our goal always, is to get out the answers. And I think it will become more evident. But so far, there's a lot of people real scared, and frightened people respond poorly.
Yeah, that's true. And, the weird thing is that the panic is weird. And, our studio manager just told us that there's no toilet paper left at Costco. I mean, how does that getting the flu and having a toilet paper attack, I don't see how. I mean, you think there'd be frozen burritos, out of it.
Right.
I don't get it. But, John Whitehead, our good friend, has a good piece, and we have that on the website today about how really what you should be panicking about is the government's reaction to this panic, because they're going to use it to grab power and install a police state. But speaking of police state, before we get into our main topic, I just want to quickly mention to you, Dr. Paul, and to our viewers, that the compromise bill on the reauthorization of these three components of the Patriot Act will be on the floor today. And so what happens when compromise is a four-letter word in Washington, and it's a very bad bill. Senator Paul's come out opposed to it. Congressman Massey was just on the floor talking against it. Massey said, something is rotten when Pelosi and the GOP are both whipping for the Patriot Act extension bill. And Senator Paul, there's a good quote from the senator I'll read really quick before we go on. Here's what Senator Paul said. "The deal on FISA is weak sauce, diluted and made impotent by Attorney General Barr. None of the reforms prevent secret FISA court from abusing the rights of Americans. None of the reforms prevent a president of either party from a politically motivated investigation." Big disappointment. This is what Senator Paul said. So people that are inclined, you might want to have a little word with your congressman, because they're going to be voting on it this morning.
Very good. And back to our subject for today, and that has to do with Syria and the ongoing conflict there. And we describe it as a battle over Idlib. It's a town near Idlib, but basically in that area. And it's what Turkey's going to do, what the United States is going to do, what Russia is going to do, because the conflict hasn't been settled. But from the viewpoint of many, Russia has been doing pretty well. But Erdogan is not going to go away softly, and he's trying to stir up. And people claim that he'd be happy just to get into a hot war with Russia. But he has some allies. The ISIS people are allies with him. The radicals are allied with him. And can you believe it? Some people in our administration are allies with him, because it brings out the conflict about Russia versus, the rest, and Russia's bad. And the allies here, strong allies that we would like to really give it to Russia, are leadership in Republicans and Democrats in the deep state. So they're pumping that up. They might not say, "Oh, we don't want war," but they're actually very sympathetic with this. And of course, Pompeo is the leadership in the administration. So we have leadership on Republican and Democrat side, and we have the president is taking a different stand, and he'd like to soften it and not see the conflict. And yet we have Pompeo, who's very militant and wants to send weapons to Turkey and all, and also he has Jeffrey on his side too, an important position as ambassador to Syria.
Yeah, he's the special envoy for Syria. But it's true. Pompeo was basically setting up his own shop, it's separate from the White House, doing his own thing, because the president has said over and over, we'll give him credit for, we'll believe him at his word that he wants to extricate us from the region. But what's happening is James Jeffrey is our special envoy for Syria. He is a neocon, dyed in the wool. He's a never-Trumper, which just tells you the real tragedy of the Trump administration, to have so many people opposed to him in high positions. But he says that talks are on with NATO allies to provide direct military aid to Turkey. Now, what happened is that Turkey and Russia clashed over Idlib because Turkey has embedded itself with literally al-Qaeda. And the Russians say, no, this is not going to happen. They met, as we talked about this last week, they met late last week. They reached a deal for a ceasefire. But when they saw that little bit of daylight between Turkey and Russia, the neocons rushed in. We got to exploit this. Here, let's give you some weapons. Remember, Jeffrey snuck into Syria illegally and said on Syrian soil, we are going to deliver ammunition to Turkey. And then the State Department actually had to walk that back a little bit when he got home. This is the same James Jeffrey who has supported a no-fly zone over Syria, who came from a neoconservative think tank, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and he said regarding assistance to Turkey, quote, everything is on the table. So this guy there, freelancing, I don't understand why the president can't get control of these people unless maybe he's in on it. He's pretending he's a good cop and they're the bad cops.
And the fact that we are moving in that direction by a certain group as much as they can get away with, and they are also working with the radicals once again. There's people in this country that see the ISIS group and Al-Qaeda as just useful instruments and, excuses for building it. And sure, of course, they fight it to a degree, but most of the time it's not fought. Russia was a better fighter against ISIS than we were,
Oh, yeah.
And that's a shame to have to say that, because it's almost like, you get in trouble for saying things like that. But the policy ends up that way. But nobody can deny the truth that there's a mixed bag in the administration, right now, and there is this fight going on between Pompeo and other parts of the administration. So, but there's other countries are involved here too, because Erdogan would like to get rid of Sisi in Egypt. He would like to put Muslim Brotherhood, in charge.
Yeah.
And he's still, the one article was, I think, mentioned was the dream of the Ottoman Empire before World War I. And who knows what kind of arguments they could make with that, because certainly what happened as a consequence is what we've been suffering from for 100 years. So, but it's hard to change things that are 100 years old, but there may be some beefs. I'm not sure that Turkey has the biggest beef, because how did they get control of all that land anyway? So you could go back 500 years or something if you want to sort this out. But right now, this is an immediate fight. This is determining, and it's been narrowed down to a small section of Syria, and it introduces the United States, and it introduces the power, the Russians, and how this is lining up. And it's not so simple, because you see these two factions even in this country, and most Americans probably don't care that much.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that Russia has been fighting ISIS more effectively in Syria. But the thing is, I don't think that should be such a surprise, because the border of Syria to the distance to the Russian border is about 500 miles. I just looked it up as you were talking. That's 200 miles closer than where we sit to El Paso here in Texas. That's how close Syria is to Russia. And so having a radical Islamist state run by terrorists closer than we are to El Paso would be a huge concern for the Russians. So they do have a lot more incentive than we do, because it's not going to affect us necessarily. But one of the things that caught our attention and why we wanted to expand a little bit on this issue is our good friend Colonel Doug McGregor, who's spoken at a couple of our conferences. He had a good piece in the National Interest, which we recommend having a look at. But he's talking about, how this is playing out. And one of the things that he speculated is that Pompeo is playing a game to exploit the Russia paranoia, which is rampant in the U.S. Everyone's obsessed with Russia. exploit the Russian paranoia, get Washington to solidly back Turkey in a war with Russia, and then Pompeo will ride this victory to the White House. You know, this is the kind of delusion. And I think McGregor's probably right on this speculation.
Yeah, it remains to be seen, but he's been a pretty good analyst.
Yeah.
And of course, we were hoping he'd get a good position in the administration.
Well, that would have helped a lot.
And, you know, even though he wouldn't have been 100% with us, he'd be so close and so sympathetic. At least he would talk to people that had a different position.
Yeah.
But he, in a way, was the best choice because he was more pragmatic in that his ideas could work, and he had the credibility of it, but it was not to be that way, so they turned him down.
But McGregor correctly concludes it would be really a sick joke if the Trump administration were to allow Erdogan to put into power, to help put into power, to protect people in Syria who were following the Sunni Islamist cause who attacked the U.S. on 9/11. I mean, how crazy is that? Yeah,
it is a real mess, and I think this, it's there. It seems to ratchet up at different times, but it still shows that Syria looks like it's going to survive, and it's going to be allied with Russia. And you just made a case for why it's probably, more morally justifiable and practical for self-defense that Russia be, participating in this. But I just hope, the biggest hope that we have to have is this effort where some are trying to agitate. And, there are some of our neocons, they've been there for so long, they don't mind. It's not like it's top secret.
Yeah.
If it doesn't come out immediately, it comes out later. Oh yeah, we had to agitate. But just think of how many wars that we've gotten into for that way. We had to go into, places like Afghanistan and Iraq, and how we always plan to contain Iran. It's always justifiable. At the same time, it's a march toward war. It's authoritarianism at its worst. But back to who really benefits, there's some money involved in this.
Oh, yeah. But, Pompeo should be forced to answer, why is James Jeffrey being allowed to come to the aid of al-Qaeda in Syria? Here's Jeffrey just yesterday, Tuesday. Here's a quote. He's complaining, Russia and Syrian government are out to get a military victory in all of Syria. Well, yeah, that's why it's called Syria. So he's complaining about, he's coming to the aid of al-Qaeda. And some people might say, oh, come on, you're exaggerating. It's not al-Qaeda that runs Idlib. Well, here's the spokesman for our anti-ISIS coalition, Colonel Miles Kaggans, just 3 weeks ago talking about Idlib. This is the guy who's there and knows. Quote, Idlib province seems to be a magnet for terrorist groups, especially because it's an ungoverned space in many ways. There are a variety of groups there. All of them are a nuisance, a menace, and a threat to hundreds of thousands of civilians who are just trying to make it through the winter. Here's our spokesman for our coalition saying Idlib is chock full of terrorists. So why does James Jeffrey and Mike Pompeo want to protect them? They should have to answer that question.
Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion. Syria has been around for a while, and I keep thinking, a long time.
Yeah.
How long has the United States been around? Well, a bit of time, but not a long, long time. So here we have the United States over here, so many good things about us, and yet when you branch out and decide you extend your borders too far and your influence, all of a sudden you run into some roadblock. So we have to go, and this goes for especially the last 10, 15 years, well, 20 years in Afghanistan, that we've gone so out, and here we're really strangers the way, the cultures are, the religious patterns are, and here we are over here. So this whole idea that we know what's best for Syria and we have to pick sides, especially if Syria's on the side of fighting ISIS.
Yeah.
That's the real irony.
Yeah, well, I'll just close by saying this is McGregor's conclusion. I think we probably would share this. Colonel McGregor said, Trump should tell Pompeo, get on the phone with Erdogan and tell him, hey, if you want to take on Russia in northern Syria, go for it, but you're on your own. I think that's pretty good advice.
Yes, that's for sure. Sometimes I think it should be unnecessary to actually even do that. They should be on their own from the very beginning. But that's proper advice right now, but unfortunately I don't think it's going to happen. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. And as usual, we're arguing the case for non-intervention, providing the truth about what a non-interventionist foreign policy would be like to the best of our ability. And we get more convinced every single day that interventionism and authoritarianism and empire building is wrong. It's wrong morally, it's wrong under our Constitution, it's wrong practically, and leads to trouble. It's been around for a long time, but no matter how many failures there are, we keep going back as human beings to saying, oh yes, we're going to be the best. We will be good authoritarians and we'll run the world better than others. So the day will come when we in the United States will have an opportunity to change our foreign policy, like today if we really wanted to. So that day will come, and we have to get enough people to understand that you can still be a good American and take a policy and take a position on a policy of non-interventionism, minding our own business, being willing to talk to people, willing to practice diplomacy, and to trade and talk with people as much as necessary. I think that's a good way to go. It certainly is much better for the world if your goal is peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.